Hello, how's everyone doing today? I'm here with a special guest, Todd Holland. Todd Holland is I don't know what he is, maybe a limited government guy, friendly to anarchy. He's a friend of mine. Yep, I have them. He also is a real estate agent. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me, man.
Anytime. So I think you wanted to talk a little bit about land tax, right?
I do. I would. I'd like
All
to
right,
fit it
go
into the
ahead.
conversation at some point. Yeah.
Go.
Okay. So, I mean, basically, I am sympathetic to the whole no government anarchist agenda. My whole issue is that I feel like strictly saying that there should be no government is kind of an unrealistic goal. Sure, it's something great to think about and something great to talk about, but the fact that this change is going to have to come from the state, in order, basically what I'm saying is basically the state is going to have to abolish itself, and I don't really see that happening anytime soon. Feel free to disagree with me on that, but I feel like that's sort of where the change is going to come from. I think that the biggest challenge is not so much ways to make the state disappear, but two things. One, ways to make private companies and private individuals compete with state-provided services. And two, in the event that we have something like taxation, which we will inevitably have taxation, it's very difficult to imagine a situation where we have a government funded by the people in which there is no taxation. I think that we should try to limit the impact of that taxation. So the obvious answer is, find something to tax with an inelastic or perfectly inelastic supply. If you look at things such as income, sales, property improvements, even which are actually pertinent to the land, which is interesting. These things are all elastic, which means that as you know, as things become more expensive, as the tax burden increases, I should say, you'll find that people at the margin produce these less and less and less. Land taxes, on the other hand, are perfectly inelastic, which means that you cannot create land, you cannot create natural resources, you cannot destroy land for too long a period of a time. You can certainly render it obsolete, but in the aggregate, in the long run, it will come back. If you look at Hiroshima after the explosion, sure, that rendered a big part of that land unusable, but that does come back after a certain number of decades. So basically, the way that it works is that the government will tax the economic rent that's available to the land. Basically, the return from the land to the entrepreneur or to the landholder. So by making land more costly to hold, by increasing basically the tax on that, you can facilitate a greater degree of transfer from producer to consumer surplus. And the way that that happens is that so as land becomes more costly to hold, people are incentivized to either transfer that land to other parties who can make more higher valued users, or simply find more productive uses for that land themselves. Now, you with me so far? How do you feel about my description? Are you
It's pretty accurate.
on
I
board?
disagree. I disagree with it. We'll talk about that a little later. But yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, sure. That's fine. Basically, I'll continue with this. Basically, I'm just saying that as an alternative to income tax, property tax, sales tax, I think it's more efficient. It's not perfectly efficient. Taxation is taxation. There's always a burden, but I think it's more efficient than some of the things that will actually limit productivity in society. So basically, there has been a
That's
couple. The whole movement is called Georgianism after Henry George. He was a very prominently known economist back in 1865. He had an excellent book that dealt with land tax and a single tax and basically the entire green tax shift. So the this is not a new issue. It's not a revolutionary thought, which that I'm not preaching something that no one has ever tried. In 1925, the mayor of Cincinnati, his name was Murray Seasongood. He instituted. He was a part of a political party called the Charterites. And I like these guys because, at the core, they were just Democrats running as something else. But what their entire platform was a very local, decentralized government based on sort of not even cities, sort of neighborhoods, blocks, community centers. That's where their whole facility was based upon. I agree with that. As compared to federal government or state government. I think the local government, or even local governance, is certainly more efficient than those. So his whole platform was a good government. Now I think that's kind of funny because that's kind of a contradiction. There's no such thing as really a good government, but there are ways that the government can limit its negative impact. Consciously limit its negative impact while still giving the men at the top, quote unquote, their payday. So basically, he instituted an increase in land taxes while decreasing other taxes. And Cincinnati, within a matter of a few years, boomed to a point where it could compete with other metropolitan statistical areas in the country. Now, shortly thereafter, there was a regime change back to, I think, Republican, and then he did away with that whole thing, and Cincinnati kind of tanked since. It hasn't tanked, but it's certainly not where it's not a big name. It's not Silicon Valley. It's not in New York. It's not in Los Angeles. So basically that's, and if you look at the impacts of high land value taxes in terms of in the face of crisis, right? So if you look at compare, and this is across time zones, across time periods, it's difficult to pinpoint this, but if you look at the difference between San Francisco after the 1906 earthquake and New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, basically New Orleans still has not recovered. And San Francisco, within a period of a few years, as fast as they could build it, recovered quickly and is now, more than it was from before the disaster, and it quickly became that way too. And one theory that I tend to agree with was because of the high land taxes. Now, the land tax in San Francisco is incredibly high. It's among the highest in the entire country. New Orleans, not so much. They have very high property tax, which is not the same as a land tax, but they have very high property tax. So when these sort of the nature of the crisis was different, but the effect was the same, in that the land was leveled, it was rendered unusable, and none of the buildings were standing. It was essentially the same impact. So what we saw in San Francisco was a very, very quick rebuild, very quick. Things became, they took ruined rubble from the marina and they rebuilt the Sunset. And they took, leveled things in the Mission, and they totally repaved the north part of San Francisco. And they did this because whether they did that or not, they would be responsible for the same amount of money. Now, people respond to incentives, and as such, these improvements were sort of incentivized by the high land tax system. Contrast that with New Orleans, which has very low land taxes but high property taxes. So they have no real incentive to improve the property, because let's say that one guy wants to improve his lot versus everyone else, you've got a serious problem, because this guy will now have to pay a huge amount of money in property taxes for doing so, kind of a penalty for improving his lot. But he will see no economic gain for this because the neighborhood is essentially leveled. Everyone has to get together and do it, and you have a coordination problem. So again, my whole point is not that land taxes are perfectly efficient. There is no perfectly efficient tax. There's no perfectly efficient government intervention, period. But I think that when you compare it to other more costly, in economic concepts, economic terms, more costly taxes, more costly ways of basically extorting and stealing from citizens, I think that land taxes, in my opinion, is the most efficient, if not one of the most efficient. So that's basically my whole spiel on that. I appreciate you letting me run through the entire speech, but that's where I'm at. So certainly open to discussion on that.
Right, yeah. Well, I certainly agree it's the most efficient, the best tax, although, I think there's still some problems with it. One is that, how do you determine what the value of the land is? It's premised on this idea that there's this innate value of the land, but everything, including land, has subjective value. There is no, this is what the land is worth. So, how do you determine what that is? Secondly, once you start having a tax at all, and the money is given without your consent to a group of people, and they are able to use that to buy weaponry, what's stopping them from saying, thank you for the tax, now I have weapons, and now I'm going to demand other forms of taxation, right?
Right.
So it may start with just a land tax, but once you allow the premise of coercion and taxation to enter the mix, it grows. right? I mean, the United States didn't start having an income tax, but once you centralize power, uh, pretty much they can do what they want.
I agree. I agree with that. I mean, it certainly does have its problems. We can look at the system of taxation we have now and ask the same question. It's like, well, now that we have an income tax and a sales tax and a property tax, and we do have land taxes, what's to stop them from saying now we have a weight tax or a length of hair tax? Something other. I'm being a little bit facetious right now, but some other form of taxation. We have that same problem, with our current system as well. And so what it comes down to is that a single tax is never going to be able to pay for all of the government's current services. The government way overspending itself. I mean, we're even borrowing money from other countries to pay for stuff because we cannot pay for it purely out of tax revenue. So certainly the change needs to come from within the government. It can't be sort of forced upon the government by the people. The government itself needs to change. And
why would they do that? That seems really unrealistic to me. Why would anyone else? Why would anyone in a position of power say, you know what? I want less power. I'm not gonna. Right? I think the only way the change can ever happen is through a citizenry which is well informed and is not willing to be pushed around any longer and has means to defend itself and says, look, we're not going to go down without a fight. You're abusive. We don't recognize your authority. We understand it's all a racket. You're nothing but a propaganda pumping machine. We're not going to take it anymore. That's the way, in my opinion, to reduce the state. Not by just hoping that people in government are moral and ethical and they're going to say, you know what, I don't want as much power.
I agree. I completely agree. And I think I may have worded that poorly to say that it comes from the government just be benevolent and say, well, now we want to do things right. I think you're right. They will, corporations will never say that we want less profit. Businesses will, government will never say we want less power. I think that going back to the whole charterist view of things back in Cincinnati in 1925, the people wanted that. So the government had something to gain by limiting its own, just in the way that you said, by limiting its own scope, just to get reelected. Because here's the thing, half a loaf of bread is better than no bread at all for the government. So they would rather keep their jobs, they would rather keep their salaries and whatever, and scale back on regulatory controls if the people want that, and that's what the people want, that's what the people vote for. So I think to your point, yeah, I mean, but it is going to come from the people voting. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. It's not going to come organically from the top.
Right. Cool. So how do you expect that to happen? Just people getting sick and tired?
Well, yes. I think people will get sick and tired of an inflated government. I think that got a message here. Well, I think that I'm new to this whole thing, so I'm getting messages popping, but I don't know what to do with them. I think that in 1925, this was shortly after the First World War, and I mean not immediately after, but shortly after, and there were several things happening in the country, and I think that a few people were just fed up with the fact that our government can go ahead and wage war on such a global level and bring about some form of attrition domestically. People might have been sick of that, and then a political party may have capitalized on that particular emotion. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, it's going to come from people just being sick and tired of the way things are and wanting a change. I mean, that's what this channel is all about. I think it's people being sick and tired of things.
Sure, but we are a fringe group, I think. Yeah. But look, I don't really have answers. I mean, I could probably count on. I mean, I don't know how many people I've changed. Probably none or very very few. But I mean, I think the way to do it is. Well, one, people are narcissistic and egotistical, so you have to appeal to people's ego. I mean, the way politicians speak aren't give me power and I will ruin people's lives. Sure. It's, don't you care about the downtrodden? Don't you care about the weak? Look at this single mother, working to feed a family, and they appeal to people's emotions, and then they use that emotion and manipulate it to further their own ends, right? And I mean, I don't know if that's maybe the way we should do it, but yeah. I don't know. I welcome pretty much anything as long as it doesn't, involve violence or contradict the means.
Right. So pretty much nothing from the government is what you're saying.
Well, I certainly don't believe that the way to achieve freedom is through a violent revolution. Certainly, historically, all violent revolutions ended in not anarchy, but replacing a worse government. So if
Right.
the majority of the population isn't willing to accept anarchy, we're not going to have it. And a few upset anarchists who decide to overthrow the government, if it were possible, you're just going to replace another state because the majority of people would feel helpless, right? I mean, if you got rid of the government tomorrow, what you would have are people who are on the dole rioting and saying, "We want our free shit. We want," like they're doing in Greece now.
Right.
So this idea that if we just press the button and government, in my view, is completely insane. You have to do it gradually.
Right.
This week you'll get less of a paycheck. Next week you'll get less of a paycheck.
Yeah.
6 months you're not going to get anything. You have 6 months to put your affairs in order, and I think that's how you end these things.
Sure, absolutely. But to your point, that mandate has to come from somewhere, and as you said, that violently and through forcible change, I think I may get some flack for saying this, but for people to start doing that sort of a thing, I think is a very slippery slope because as you said, nothing gets better through revolutions. Things inherently get worse, and I'm struggling to think of a revolution that ended. I guess there was the American Revolution. That worked out okay for us, but
right. That's why we're here now, because it's working out great.
Right. Exactly. So my point is, I completely agree with you that these things need to come from a perspective of education and of dissemination of knowledge, not from sort of being.
I disagree with you there.
Okay.
I think anyone who says I don't mean to insult you, well, I do because I'm going to do it. I think anyone who says the answer is education is uneducated. I mean,
Okay.
I'll give an example. I'll give a perfect example. Certainly in New York, I'm not sure if it's in all 50 states, they require for fast food to list the number of calories in the amount of things.
Okay.
On cigarettes, you have a warning: don't smoke. This is bad for your health. Has cigarette usage gone down? No. Have people consumed less in the fast food since the calorie things were there? No. In fact, usage has gone up. Right? People who snort cocaine aren't ignorant. They know it's bad for them. I'm a fat piece of shit. I know it's bad for me. I don't give a shit. So I think the solution isn't education. It's to cure apathy. It's to get people upset and pissed off and say, we're not going to take it anymore. It's not just to disseminate knowledge, because if people obtain knowledge but don't care, it's worthless.
Sure. I mean, I agree that that posting calories has no effect. Posting information on cigarettes has no effect whatsoever, because these are voluntary choices that you yourself make. Like, I choose to eat a hamburger, I will eat the hamburger. I choose to smoke, I will smoke. If you inform people that someone is stealing from you, that will make them, that education will cause a change, because if they understand the impact that party X is stealing from me, they're taking away my liberties, my rights, that will in turn make people angry, and that anger will cause the uprising, the change, the political change that we're looking for.
I don't know. I was talking to someone and the response I normally get. I mean, there are a few responses that I get in these interactions. One is, okay, government's abusing my rights, but I'm just one guy. What can I do? What? I'm going to complain? So what? Wishes don't create reality. I'm upset the government steal my money. Okay, I'm upset with beautiful women that want to fuck me. Who cares? Life is what it is. So, what can I do? What can I do? I think that's a common refrain.
Right.
And another common refrain is, well, yeah, they're taking money from me without my consent, but it's for the greater good or the common good. One of these phrases.
That in itself is a misconception, though. I mean, it is not for the greater good. It's for politically determined greater good. So I think that the right move. I mean, my response to that, someone who said, well, like you just are uneducated properly on what the greater good is. The greater good is a government that, if anything, just protects your property rights and just protects you from any kind of harm from others. And we don't even really need a government to do that for us. We can have private courts and private police and competition for the government. We don't need the government to do that for us. But to your point, the whole what can I do? What can one person do? I don't think that it's purely education. I don't think it's purely anger and purely upset, because uneducated, misdirected anger leads to serious consequences, just like apathetic education does. So it really does need to be the combination of the two, in my opinion.
Right. No, I agree with that. I agree with that. Are you optimistic? Because I ain't.
Am I optimistic?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
All right.
Why wouldn't I be? I mean, there's in the act, there's a great it's a great George Carlin quote, which is, I'm going to butcher it, but think about.
I'll correct it.
I'm sorry?
I'll correct it for you. Go ahead.
Please do. But it goes something like, think about how stupid the average person is, and then realize that half the world is stupider than that person is. So, I think that, there's only so much that you can really educate. I mean, you can't teach a rock to do a backflip, is what I'm trying to say. That's the impossible.
That doesn't sound like an optimistic response. That sounds pretty pessimistic.
I'm optimistic about the right half of it, not the left half of the bell curve, but the right half. I think the right half, being an informed agent of change, the right change. I think that to perpetuate that, I think, can lead to extremely fruitful results. Do I think that every single person in the country or in the world is capable of producing fruitful results? No, I don't think that's true. I think in many cases people just need to stay out of the way of the people who are doing the right thing, and that might not be the most politically correct thing to say, but that is how I feel about things. I'm optimistic that the right people can do the right things.
Sure. Well, that's interesting. That do you think that one's view of human nature, or one's view of are people mainly good or bad, informs or determines their political view, or do you believe that they're separate?
Well, it's difficult to say, because again, good and bad are very subjective. I mean, everything the government does is for our good, according to what they tell us. We know it's not true.
Right.
So to say that people are good or bad is kind of like saying, is the government good or bad? It depends on what they do. It depends on actions, not on inherent characteristics. And I think that these things are, this might be off topic. I think these things are instilled. You're not born one way. The only thing that really comes into its inception as being harmful, I think, is a monopolistic coercive force, and that is the government.
Right.
Right. So I'm not sure if that answered your question well. It probably didn't, but.
Right, you're correct. You didn't answer it. But I mean, because my view is sort of that it's irrelevant. That I think there are many people of all different political views who have differing views on human nature. There are Democrats, Republicans, anarchists, capitalists, socialists who may agree on human nature and may disagree. Myself, I'm a cynic. I think most people are narcissistic and very self-deluded. I think humanity in a nutshell is everyone sucks but me. Everyone is very good at criticizing everyone else and very weak at criticizing themselves. People are generally much harsher in their criticisms of other people, or more lenient than when they view themselves, right? If a person says, well, I'm a very tolerant person, how do you know? You're biased. So people, I think, in general are, and I see this a lot even among a lot of libertarians. Like, I think one of the reasons a lot of people may like libertarianism is, and part of my, I think, cynicism is rooted in this, isn't so much necessarily a principled thing, but is so partially narcissism of, I'm so much smarter than the people who can't see through the propaganda.
Right. Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that I think that it's very difficult to judge yourself. I think it's very difficult to accurately lay out one's faults sort of on the table. Whereas, because we don't focus on the bad things we do unless we're trying to go to sleep at night and we're struggling to do so. At that point, I do focus on the stuff that I mess up on. But I think, to your point, for the most part, we focus mainly on what others do wrong, what others could be doing, what others are doing to us how are we the victims of situations. And I think that that's it's a part of human nature, but I think that no political faction, no school of thought is 100% free of that.
Right.
I can't think of one that is.
Right. Well, yes, I agree, but I think to me that's why, I sort of get upset when, I'm a bit, I don't know if I'm a narcissist. I would say I'm more of a self-loathing narcissist where, I'm not a big fan of myself, but relative to how I feel about others, I am.
Sure.
So, I hate myself, but compared to everyone else, how I feel about everyone else, I love myself. Uh, but I would say that, freedom in general is humble. Now, the enemies of freedom say it's arrogant. It believes that you know everything that's right. But that's not what I'm saying when I advocate, free choice. I'm not saying that you're never going to make mistakes. Right? I make mistakes, and yes, there are other people who probably give me better advice and in certain situations may know better for me. But the question at the end of the day is, assuming the worst, which is someone fails, would you rather fail based on your own actions or be the victim of someone else's good intentions? And I think freedom is saying, I don't know how to live other people's lives for them, so I'm going to give them the freedom to live their own.
Yeah, I agree. I 100% agree with that. I think that I've heard you say that quote before several times, and
What quote?
that you would rather be, sorry, would I rather be the victim of my own bad choices or of someone else's good intentions? And again, that goes back to, this might be off topic from what we're talking about, but the subjective nature of what is good, what is bad, what is evil. And, in any and all situations, the government will be able to justify, or will at least try to justify its actions as being good. It will never say we're doing this to specifically harm people. And I think that's the danger of allowing government that much power.
Well, I think a good definition of evil, and this is one Stefan Molyneux said, and I sort of agree with him, is saying that something is right and admonishing others for not following it, and you not following yourself. So, for instance, one of the things that makes the government evil is that they acknowledge theft is wrong, murder is wrong, and they try to stop other people from doing it, but they do it themselves. They say printing money is wrong, counterfeiting is evil, but we're going to do it. We're just not going to call it counterfeiting. We're going to call it quantitative easing. So evil is saying something is wrong and doing it yourself.
Yeah, that's certainly hypocrisy, and that draws a bridge. Is hypocrisy evil? I might agree with you there. Certainly, in an intellectual world where academic honesty is important, I think hypocrisy is one of the greater evils, because at the end of the day, you can't prescribe. Here's the thing: you can't prescribe society to do one thing and then do the opposite yourself. And then when society even does follow your rules, if you look at some financial regulations on Wall Street, even companies that follow those regulations, which, when a regulation passes, you will do the bare minimum to abide by that regulation. That's just the nature of things. And when the government, when regulatory agencies come down these companies and say, well, you should be doing more, it's like, well, listen, you can't give us these regulations that inhibit our actions, which we're going to adhere to, and then come down on us saying that we're not doing enough, when you yourself, as a government, are doing a completely backwards version of this. So, I agree with you. Hypocrisy might, certainly in that perspective, might be an evil. It might be an evil.
Yeah. I don't know if you saw the movie L.I.E., but my favorite scene in L.I.E. is the father comes home and he says to his son, how was school today? And the son says, shit. and the father says, "Watch your fucking mouth." Now, how is school doing?
Yeah, there you go.
So that is sort of the state in a nutshell. I think.
Right, right.
All authority, pretty much,
Yeah,
right? God says don't kill. He kills, besides for Noah and some animals, the entire human race.
yeah.
Eminem says he doesn't allow cursing in his house. Right?
Oh,
No one would even know of Eminem if he didn't curse. So,
right. Absolutely.
just this hypocrisy. Cool. So I guess the next topic, unless you have one in particular, I guess is intellectual property. What is your thoughts on that?
I've actually got, so I know you're a huge Spooner fan, so I prepared a Spooner quote for you that applies to this, and I think you might even know which one I'm about to say before I say it. I'm going to read it to you because it's written down right here. It says that a man has a natural and absolute right, and if a natural and absolute, then necessarily a perpetual right of property in the ideas of which he is the discoverer or creator, that his right of property in ideas is intrinsically the same as and stands on identically the same grounds with his right of property in material things, that no distinction of principle exists between two cases. So that, I think, summarizes certainly my view of intellectual property, and it goes back to sort of the hypocrisy of government when it comes to patents and sort of facilitating monopolies for short periods of time. My question is that if the government will say that, listen, this idea, this work is yours, we're going to attribute it to you, and you're the only person that can sell this or profit off of this. If that's the case, why is it only for a set period of time? Why not just let it be forever? Either don't give it to us at all, or let it happen forever.
Right. I certainly would agree. So you say that intellectual property is legitimate?
Well, not in its current. I mean, listen, not in its current state. And when we're talking about intellectual property, I assume you mean intellectual property in the United States in the way it is right now with the current patent system.
Oh, I mean even just as a concept. I mean, I am a big fan of Spooner, but I disagree with him here. And the reason I think he's wrong is I'm not interested in what you created. The question is, what should the punishment be? And the punishment should be, in my response, proportional. And my response, look, if I insult you and I call you fat, you have the right to stab me because I hurt your feelings. If I hurt your feelings, you can hurt my feelings, but stabbing me is excessive. So I would say that punishment that involves the use of depriving someone of their property or of their person through a fine or incarceration should only be done if you deprive someone else of something. And it's impossible to deprive someone else of their ideas because they retained their ideas. If I were to steal your shirt, you no longer can use or in possession of that shirt. But if I steal your ideas, I haven't stolen your ideas. You still have your ideas, right? There's no shifting from the one owner to one possessor to another. And I think that's why what Spooner misses, that stealing something that isn't your ideas results in you're depriving you of your property, and therefore it's okay as punishment to make restitution and deprive me of my property as punishment. But you can't deprive anyone of their ideas, right?
Well, I think that's true, and I'm sort of on track with you on that. If it's purely the idea, but a lot of the time it's a manifestation of that idea. If you think about let's say literary works, for example, it's probably a bad example, but literary works, let's say Game of Thrones. I'm huge into Game of Thrones, huge into a Song of Ice and Fire. So let's use this as an example. Let's say that this guy spent upwards of 40 years of his life or 30 years of his life writing these books. But before he gets a chance to go out and publish them, I take every single written word that he's written, every idea that.
Yeah, did you freeze? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I think you froze. Can you repeat it?
Oh, where did you last hear me?
Every single word that's written.
Okay, yeah, I mean, if I take every single word that's written from him, every single one of his books, and I copy them word for word in my own manuscript, and I send those to a publisher, and I get them published before he did. I put 0 hours of my own labor into this. I created nothing for myself, whereas he created this wonderful idea, this wonderful world that people enjoy. If I steal every bit of that, and I profit off of that, and I put myself in a position where I can gain where he can't, and I put absolutely nothing into this, I think that there's something wrong with that. I think just taking the idea, just making an idea public, I think there's nothing inherently wrong with that. And I agree with you that when you copyright something, not when you, I'm sorry, when you copy something, when you copy, let's say, let's say a software program, Microsoft Word. If you pirate a Microsoft Word, Microsoft Office, instead of paying the exorbitant $378 or whatever it costs to get that, I think that I think that there might not be anything wrong with that, because there's a very good chance that you weren't going to buy that anyways. You know what I mean? So you're not technically on the demand curve for that product. If you're saying, well, that's too much, there's no way I can afford it unless I pirate it. In that case, I think there's nothing wrong with it, because you're not. It's not a sale that would have happened that no longer will happen. The company loses no revenue from it whatsoever, because the marginal cost of producing that software is effectively zero. In that case, there's nothing wrong, because the demand curve, the demand for that product doesn't even apply to me. So I think that's different from sort of the Game of Thrones example that I illustrated earlier, where I not only am I replacing his demand curve with my the demand for his product with the demand for my product. I'm undercutting his entire mechanism of profiting. So I think that there's different ways to look at it. I think the intellectual property as an idea, as a concept, has many sides to it, and I think that it really depends where you stand. Versus are you stealing someone's profit? Are you putting yourself in a position where you can profit and where someone else can't, or are you simply accessing something that's as a zero marginal cost that someone's using their own monopoly power to try to sell?
But why do you have the right to profit? See, I think that's where we disagree. Profit is taking someone else's income, right? So you don't own the potential income. You don't own potential property. You own actual property. And
Right.
so until someone gives you money for an exchange of goods, you're not in possession of that goods. And they're free to change their mind. They're free not to buy it. So to say, well, a person is reducing any future income that I have, that means you're entitled to other people's income. That means you're entitled to the property of other people, mainly money that they would give you before they actually give it to you. Why are you entitled to that?
Well, I think that maybe we're not perfectly understanding each other when it comes down to this, but I'm not saying that George Martin, the writer of Game of Thrones, is entitled to profit from anything. I'm saying that because he put his labor into producing a product that ultimately is not, it's not a machine, it's not a computer, it's not a software application, it's a list of ideas put down on paper. I think that he is entitled to the fruit of that labor, which would be the money that he would make if he were able to sell that book. If I put no man hours, if I put no labor into producing this, but I somehow find a way to manage to steal his work and sell it as my own, he's entitled to profit in the same way that really any other manufacturer of goods is entitled to profit, in that if people want it, they will pay for it, and if they don't, they won't pay for it. So, I'm sorry, something just popped up right. Can you still see me?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I can almost see you.
Yeah.
Leave the room.
So I guess what I'm saying is that neither George Martin nor myself are entitled to the profit of that book, but he should be allowed before I should be allowed to reap the fruit of that labor, because I put absolutely no labor into it. So I think that in that case, to protect his intellectual property through some sort of a copyright, it makes sense to me. I haven't really found an argument to sort of dissuade me from that. So, yeah.
Right. Right. Cool. I guess that makes sense. Although I disagree with you anyway.
How can it make sense if you disagree?
Well, I don't know, because I have to mull it over. You're persuasive, but I think I think yes, a person has a right to enter the marketplace and compete, but I mean, I think a way around this is you could say you can't commit fraud. So if someone, for instance, I have a right to, let's say, you write something and I get a hold of it first. Do I have a right to copy it word for word and write, say, written by Daniel Rothschild? Well, that's sort of fraud because I didn't actually write it. You did. So if there's a law where I can publish it, not have to pay you a penny for the rights to publish it, but have to attribute it to you, I'm not depriving you of profits. I'm actually exposing your name where now people hear of you. You're more famous. Maybe I'm better at it than you of selling books, and now you can get speaking gigs and tours and make money off that way.
Well, you've just described the publishing industry kind of down to a T. Where I'm the writer and you're the publisher. That is what the publishing industry is. So the publisher is essentially a middleman to get the book from the writer to the public, which is exactly as you've described. Now, yeah, if you were to say, I have to think about this as well. Think of a good comeback to it as well. Probably not within the time frame that we have, but yeah, I mean, I think that certainly when you talk about trademarks, okay, different varieties of intellectual property. When we talk about trademarks, I think the clearest argument for why intellectual property should exist, or at least what kind of it, what level of intellectual property should exist, I would say would be trademarks. Maybe trade dress, but not as much, but trademarks. Because that protects exactly against what you described in that you protect against fraud,
Right.
with a trademark.
Right. Well, if you have laws against fraud, then isn't laws for a trademark just redundant? Just have laws against fraud, and you don't really need a trademark.
I think that is what a trademark is protection against fraud of intellectual property. Uh, yeah. So
All right.
yeah, redundant maybe if you have one blanket policy of fraud, but I think that fraud in many different, you can't misrepresent yourself, but can you misrepresent your works? I think that maybe misrepresenting your works might fall under a different purview than simply misrepresenting yourself.
Sure. And even fraud itself is hard. I asked Walter Block because I like to play devil's advocate. Is if a guy says to a woman, if you go to bed with me, I'll marry you, and she goes to bed with him, and afterwards he says, I'm not going to marry you, has he committed fraud?
Well, I mean, so when you look at contract law, there has to be sort of a lawful object being exchanged, and sex is not a lawful object being exchanged under any circumstance. That's prostitution.
So
So
that should be lawful. If selling is legal and fucking is legal, fucking should be legal, as George Carlin understood.
well, it should be. It should be, but potentially. But we're looking at under that blanket of reason. But we're looking at kind of that particular situation. Is that fraud? I think fraud sort of really it requires some sort of a contractual obligation to do something. In which case you breach that, or you misrepresent the facts of that contract. And because the contract, at least in this country, I'm not familiar with contract laws internationally, but at least in this country, contracts require a lawful object. I would say that in that particular situation, the man has not really committed fraud. He's broken a promise, sure, but that's not committing fraud.
Sure, I sort of agree. I'm just being just playing devil's advocate. Curious
No,
to
yeah,
get.
yeah, absolutely, sure.
Sure. I guess my next topic, because it's not really a show with me unless we are sure to piss off a lot of people. Let's talk a bit about feminism, the men's right movement. I'm not really a fan of pretty much either. I mean, I'm a fan of. I think we lost some viewers. Good. I think that I'm not really a fan of either. I'm a fan of individual and equal rights. I think most what I would call victim rights are just an excuse to get extra benefits that don't occur naturally, right? I mean, I don't see a lot of feminists complain about family court, right? So
Right, right.
if it's about equality, shouldn't they?
It, it's a touchy subject. It's very difficult to, sort of indemnify one group or another, which, maybe some people argue that's sort of what feminists do is indemnify one group over another. But,
Get rid
um,
of pigs.
if you look at it from a strategic point of view, and I like to look at these things strategically, um, if it was about equality, it wouldn't be necessarily feminism because equal rights and feminism, basically equal rights says that there is no oppressive group essentially, is that all groups need to have the same, or at least a level playing field. Whereas I think feminism and maybe the men's rights movements on the other end of the spectrum, they say that one group oppresses the other. So when it comes down to one group oppressing the other, I don't think that something like family court, where sometimes it heavily favors the mother or the woman. I think that that's less of sort of less of a breach of equality and more of sort of recompensation for something that they feel has already been lost. I'm not saying I agree with that, but I guess they consider that reclaiming some power that they otherwise would not have. Um, whether that's whether they're correct about that, or it's difficult to say correct. One way that you set in stone, but certainly certainly nothing good can come when you sort of make one group into an enemy. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Um, cool. I would agree. I mean, I also think, victim is, this I think relates somewhat to a statism that I think one of the bad parts, and one of the reasons I think freedom isn't popular, is that freedom means if something bad happens, I have to actually have some accountability and blame myself, right? If I'm free to make my own choices, then I can't say, woe is me, and have to look inward and say, maybe I'm an idiot who makes bad choices. I can just blame other people for being oppressed. And that feels a lot better for the ego. It's a lot better for the ego to say, the reason I don't have a raise is because I'm a woman or black or whatever. The
Right.
reason I'm not successful in life is because of the patriarchy or because of the state or whatever, than saying, I fail a test, the teacher hates me. I get an A in the test, it's because I'm smart,
Right. Absolutely. And I think that I'm glad you kind of brought up the business world aspect of this with regards to raises and employment, because just as we're kind of examining this issue strategically, I think that employers certainly hire strategically, and so I think that there obviously may be some racist employers. There may be some sexist employers. I'm not by any means discounting that possibility. What I'm saying is that strategically, there is if a woman applies for a job and gets that job because of she's qualified for it, and there should be no reason she shouldn't get that job. There's a very good possibility, assuming she gets married and wants a family and so on and so forth, that she'll need to take a large chunk of time out of her work schedule and still be paid for it in terms of maternity leave, especially in the states which and companies which have that maternity contract. I'm sorry, not contract, but law. So policy, I should say. And so these employers who are hiring strategically know that within, let's say, the turnover for an employee hypothetically is, let's say, 5 years. The employee stays there for 5 years and then moves onward. If one of those years potentially could be taken out of productivity due to family matters and becoming pregnant, and they still have to compensate that employer is going to take the expected value of the remainder of the labor, which could be something to the effect of 80% or something like that, and then adjust the wage accordingly. I'm not sure if that the whole myth of the 73 cents to a dollar thing, I'm not sure if that's founded in any actual data or any reasonable data. Assuming that females do make less than males, I'm not sure if they do or not, but assuming they do, I would attribute it to be more the case of, am I going to get the full life cycle of this employee versus, something like sexism, if that makes sense. I'm not sure it's really sexism so much.
There's a book, it's either called Why Men Earn More or Why Women Earn Less. I think it's called Why Women Earn Less, and it's written by a guy who was big under the organization of Now. So he was a feminist guy, and it's not like, a woman dumped him and he became a sexist pig or something. None of that changed, but it's basically about it's not comparing comparables, right? I mean, if suppose that we both play a guitar, and for 5 months you don't practice, you're doing something else, mainly babysitting or taking care of children or whatever, and during those 3 months I am practicing the guitar. Who's going to be better at it, and who's going to be maybe invited to play at a concert and get a gig. All else, ceteris paribus, all else being equal, me, because I have 3 more months on you.
Absolutely.
So that has nothing to do with sexism. You don't take maternity leave. Uh, there are a lot of people who don't even want to hire women who are pregnant because of that.
Right.
And that's not due to sexist. It's due, I don't want to train someone, have to train someone else while you're out there and pay you when you're not working. So that's not due to a sexism or anything else, right? It's it's not, and you could say, well, it's sexist that the woman is the one who's expected to be the caretaker. Well, then birds are sexist because the female bird finds the worm. Or ants are sexist. I mean, this is just insane. I mean, I think there's a perfectly rational reason why the woman is the caretaker for the child, and that's because I think she feels more kindred for it because it came out of her, and so she wants. So since it's a part of her, she is more dedicated to making sure that child comes out well. I don't think there's anything to do.
Yeah, and even going sort of beyond just sort of the natural order of things, which I may agree with you. I need to give that some thought and see if that clicks in my head. But going beyond that, there are many women who don't plan on having children. That's just that that's a growing trend. Two incomes, no children. That it's a thing now. So these women also suffer from that policy. So I would argue, and feel free to attack this with all your force, that the problem is not so much sexism, but it's a blanket policy issued by the government on all women that women need to receive maternity leave, receive maternity leave. And that might affect some women who don't have any plan to, because the employer might have some expectation that this woman might get pregnant and might start a family and take a year off work and be paid for it.
Sure.
I mean, so what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big issue, and I think that's the main issue for the differential. I mean, when I first heard that women make less than men, I sort of said, well, men have to pay for their dates, so it sort of evens out. We're the one paying for their dinner, so we need more money. But if I decide not to be a total dick, and I don't even think I'm being a dick, I think when we get offended by that, then don't make the men pay for dinner, and then I can't make this joke anymore. Although, men don't have to pay for dinner, but then they'll have to, be friends with themselves at night. So I think that, I think that the reason for the wage gap is partially women do different jobs. You can't just compare the difference in jobs. I mean, look, a lot of black people work in sports. Is that because of affirmative action? That's stupidity.
Right.
What's the stereotype? Jews are doctors, lawyers, and in the film industry? Is that because these industries want to hire Jewish people? No, it's sometimes, I guess, maybe, I know I don't sound like much of an individualist, but maybe certain people or for some reason gravitate to certain professions.
Right.
There's not many female construction workers.
Sure. I agree with that. And so yeah, a difference in jobs, expectations from the employer, and it all comes down. I mean, the expectations part really comes down to once again a government failure, because you can't institute a policy mandating every company with over 50 employees to offer this to women without an employer strategically wondering whether a woman that he's going to hire is going to take 1 year of his 1 year of her labor, the fruit of her labor. Sorry for better term because we're talking about pregnancy, but off the market and still be paid for it, and that's at a cost to an employer. So I think that any time. So I'm going to say this right now. Anytime the government tries to do anything, and 99% of the time it's going to do it wrong. But anytime it perpetuates uncertainty in the corporate world, that leads to catastrophic outcomes. And when I talk about catastrophic outcomes, I'm talking about the chain of effects, where it's like, okay, the government has this policy in place. Therefore, employers are skeptical about hiring women. Therefore, women believe they're paid less. Therefore, women are, start to indemnify men because of this, and they think it's men who do this, not just the government who's doing this for the greater good, but they think it's men who are actually actively out to make them less successful. And then you have a situation like feminism versus the men rights activists. And I think that, I don't want to go out on a limb and say the government causes feminism. That's ridiculous. But
I never said that.
It's not helping it.
Right. I mean, sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, certainly government is a fan of these victim groups because then they can then use them to get votes by giving them free goodies stolen from other people.
Yep.
Under the guise of righting past wrongs. But yeah, so sure. But yeah, I mean, it is, there are differences. And of course, the free market, of course, will punish you. I mean, one of the things the libertarians are criticized a lot for is the right for people to be freedom of association and the right of employers to discriminate privately. I'm not government. I don't favor government discrimination. I'm against government discrimination, just like I'm against everything government. So I don't. And if you're a taxpayer, you shouldn't be denied any services. So I don't favor government discrimination. But a private person should be able to discriminate, and this is for some crazy reason considered that we support bigotry, which is no more insane than saying you support hate speech because you believe in freedom of speech, even though that means that people may say racial epithets. So but my point being that the free market will punish people, right? I mean, the free market will punish people by being a bigot because then they're depriving themselves of very good cheap labor, and the market will punish them. So yeah. So what are your thoughts on that? I guess. Well, I pretty much said it.
No, I agree. And not only do they deprive themselves of cheap labor, I think that's not even the biggest concern. If it's open and notorious that you as an employer discriminate against women actively, like not through strategically management choices, but actively discriminate against women because they're women's sexism, overt sexism, then I think that on the margin you're going to lose a substantial amount of female clients and customers. And I think that will hurt your business model. And if you're talking about, industries that coincide or quickly become more competitive as more firms enter, I think that you leave yourself open to having someone who is not openly sexist come in and sweep that clientele sort of out from under you. So I think, the free market obviously punishes. I mean, the free market punishes a lot of things. But the point is that most of those things that it punishes are bad things to begin with. Sexism, I think, is wrong. Racism, I think, is wrong.
I agree.
Discrimination against gays is wrong, and any of the LG. I'm not sure what the acronym is, but
LGBTQ. Or I don't know. It sounds like barbecue. I always confuse that with barbecue. The acronyms are very similar.
LGBTQ. But I think discrimination against any of that is wrong, and I think that rather than having some blanket government mandate where the government says you cannot do this, you cannot do that, let them do it and watch them fail, because that's what will happen. They will fail, and somebody who's more right-minded will pick up the pieces. That's the way I feel about it.
Sure. The freedom of speech includes being booed and hissed, and it means including suffering the consequences of not being your friend. So yeah, you pay for it. Yeah. Absolutely. Cool. Well, it was great having you on. We have to leave in about a minute. Anything you want to plug?
No. I was going to plug a few things. Go ahead. Certain things that I could talk to you about privately, but. Vitality Management, which is a company that I'm working with. It's a nonprofit think tank that we really want to start getting people together to start putting together proposals and policy proposals and alternative forms of taxation that would really help things out. If anybody's interested in that, please contact me, because we would love to have more deep-minded people to help us with this cause. Absolutely.
Great. Sounds very good. Great having you on. Nice talking to you as always. It was fun. Take care.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel.